Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Edwards, and it's a pleasure to serve as your moderator of the YWCA of Greater Portland's BYOBB, Bring Your Own Ballot and Beverage Women's Voting Happy Hour, a community engagement program. This afternoon's program is being recorded and also broadcast on Zoom and Facebook Live. So hello, everybody out there. And before we go any further, I just want to take a moment and start by acknowledging that as we all come together in this digital medium from many places, that we are all currently on land that has been stewarded by tribal people since time immemorial, prior to the boundaries that we as settlers know as the states of Oregon and Washington. And we want to thank the descendants of these tribal people for being the original protectors of these lands. We also acknowledge the significant urban Native American population in the Portland metropolitan area, representing over 380 federally recognized tribes. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous and Native American families today. We're honored by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families who are demonstrating resilience, resistance, revitalization, healing, and creativity, and we're honored to be guests upon these lands. Thank you. So this afternoon's event is a nonpartisan event that takes an intersectional review based on race and gender of 3 state and local ballot measures and charter amendments that are important to our community. Today, we'll be discussing Measure 110, the drug treatment and decriminalization of drug offenses, Multnomah County's Preschool for All, and the Portland City Charter Amendment authorizing new independent community policing oversight board. And the format for this afternoon includes a measure summary provided by the League of Women Voters. A big thanks to the League of Women Voters for their assistance. After the summary, the 2 speakers will present arguments in favor and in opposition, and each will have 5 minutes to do so. And then we'll allow 10 minutes for audience questions using the chat function on Zoom and Facebook Live. And we'll sort through those questions and direct them to our speakers. I will serve as timekeeper to keep us on track so that we can cover all the issues and make sure that we have enough time to cover your questions. So let's move on to our first ballot measure, Measure 110, drug treatment and decriminalization. I'll only have to say that a few more times, of drug offenses. So I'm going to first introduce our speakers. We have Trish Gardner representing the League of Women Voters, and she is also the American Association of University Women State Public Policy Chair. She will provide our overview of each of the measures this afternoon, in addition to a few other roles. Speaking in opposition of the measure, who won the coin toss to go first, is Kevin Barton. He serves as the District Attorney for Washington County and was elected to that seat in 2018. Over the course of his career, DA Barton has served as a prosecutor handling a wide variety of cases and also worked in the private sector representing people and businesses involved in civil disputes. He's a member of a number of charitable and nonprofit boards, including CARES Northwest, the Washington County Family Justice Center, and the Oregon District Attorneys Association, to name a few. And speaking in favor of this measure is John Hummel. Since 2014, he has served as the Deschutes County District Attorney and was reelected in 2018. Immediately prior to his service as District Attorney, DA Hummel was the State and Federal Policy Director for the Oregon Primary Care Association. DA Hummel previously served as the Liberia Africa Country Representative for the Carter Center, assisting Liberians in improving their justice and mental health systems as the country recovered from a brutal 14-year civil war. DA Hummel's other professional experience includes 12 years as a criminal defense attorney, teaching, and serving as a Bend City Councilor. So, with that introduction of our speakers, I'll be timekeeping again. And to our audience, as you're listening to everything, please start populating the chat with your questions. With that, I'll turn it over to Trish to provide an overview.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and everyone who is here. Ballot Measure 110 is a drug addiction treatment and decriminalization proposal. It's a statutory amendment, which was placed on the ballot by Citizens Initiative petition. The proposal would decriminalize the possession of illegal controlled substances, and I use that phrase referring to the federal Schedule 1 through 4 controlled substances, but it would decriminalize the possession of these controlled substances in Oregon, although the manufacture and sale of these substances would remain illegal. This proposal also establishes a drug addiction treatment and recovery program that is culturally appropriate and is funded in part by the state's marijuana tax revenue. In terms of the decriminalization, many of these possession of controlled substances offenses are either Class A or Class C misdemeanors. Class A is punishable by up to 364 days in jail, $6,250 in a fine, or both. Class C is a 30-day jail, $1,250 fine, or both. But they would be changed to a Class E violation. And these violations would be subject to a $100 fine and completion of a health assessment by an addiction recovery center. The measure, aside from the decriminalization, would create a drug treatment and recovery services fund, which would be financed in part by legislative appropriations and in part by the Oregon marijuana account allocations. There would also be an advisory council to oversee and approve grants to existing agencies, coordinated care organizations, and the drug treatment programs thereunder. The financial impact, the measure redistributes marijuana revenue. There's, as you may know, a marijuana revenue fund. But at this point, this measure would redistribute that, taking revenue above approximately $11 million into a drug addiction treatment and decriminalization fund. The impact of that may reduce revenue to the state school fund, the state police, mental health programs, and local governments. The total reduction is approximately $8.6 million in 2019 through 2021, and estimated $36 million in 2021 to 2023. This will also reduce revenue transferred to the Department of Corrections for local government community corrections. The result of the yes vote is what I've just said. The no vote, it would retain the classification of possession of controlled substances as I've indicated. And I believe at this point, if you want me to indicate what supporters say, I can, or I'm not sure if you have someone who will be doing that, I can do that, or say what opponents.
We do have folks to speak to in favor and in opposition to this one. So thank you, Trish. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. So first off will be Washington County District Attorney Barton to present arguments in opposition of Measure 110. You have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1 minute warning.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, very much. And thank you to everyone virtually who's present for this event. I am the district attorney in Washington County, but I'm also speaking to you as a father, husband, and community member. I live in this community and care quite a bit about how we address this issue. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that I think this conversation about how our criminal justice system addresses addiction is a long overdue conversation, and that people on both sides of this ballot measure, including Mr. Hummel, who will be speaking in a moment, are well-intentioned and have the best intentions moving forward. I'm not here to defend the current approach that our criminal justice system has regarding addiction. I think there are plenty of areas that are in desperate need of improvement with our current system, especially around solving root causes of addiction and equity issues, both within the system itself and in our society as a whole. Instead, I'm here really to talk about, is Measure 110 a good or a bad idea? And put simply, I think it's a bad idea because I think it will make our current situation even worse. And that's why I oppose it. Before I talk about all of the specific reasons why I think Measure 110 is a bad idea, I'd like just to touch on some background issues. Number one, the nature of a ballot measure versus a legislative approach. A ballot measure is an all or nothing situation. And to use a metaphor, it's a legislative approach is kind of like a buffet where you can pick and choose what you want on your plate. And if there's something you don't like that's part of the proposal, you can take it off. If there's something you want, you can put it on. But a ballot measure is something where somebody else has made that plate up for you, and it's take it or leave it. Even if you like certain aspects of the proposal, of what's on your plate, if there's other aspects that are quite simply unpalatable or bad for you, you don't have a choice. You have to eat it all or not eat it all. And that's what Measure 110 is to me. There's aspects of it which I think are really good ideas, but there's some portions of it that are, put simply, unpalatable. The other background issue I do want to touch on before I get to the areas of 110 that are unpalatable is our current drug possession laws. Our current focus with drug possession is on rehabilitation. Our goal with drug possession and criminal prosecution in the drug area is to rehabilitate, not to incarcerate. In Oregon, it is impossible, legally impossible, to send someone to prison for simply using drugs. And it's been that way since the early 1990s. In fact, it's all very rare that someone even goes to a local county jail for simple drug possession. I checked just this morning, and in Washington County Jail, there are no inmates in jail for simply drug possession. In Multnomah County Jail, there are no inmates in the jail for simple drug possession. And in the Clackamas County Jail, there are only 3 inmates in jail for drug possession, but those inmates also had other charges. I mention that because the focus of our criminal prosecution surrounding drug issues is on rehabilitation. And generally speaking, people charged with drug possession crimes receive a requirement that they are supervised by a probation officer and are required to undergo drug evaluation and treatment. I believe that people struggling with addiction will generally not voluntarily choose to stop, and that court-ordered supervision with a probation officer and a judge who are holding someone's feet to the fire is an essential component of ensuring that we can promote that rehabilitation. The problems with Measure 110, as I see it, are several. So number one, it is a decriminalization measure. It may be titled drug treatment and rehabilitation, and that is certainly an aspect of it. But also on that plate, thank you, is decriminalization. It decriminalizes the majority of drug possession of hard street drugs, meth, heroin, cocaine, LSD, etc. It makes drug treatment voluntary. And put simply, it's just like getting a traffic ticket now where a person can choose to pay a $100 fine or go through drug treatment. Most drug users will choose option 3, which is doing neither. It's harmful to children because it will eliminate the ability of our juvenile judges to detain youth, teenagers who are caught with drugs. Just today in Washington County, one of our juvenile DAs told me there was a teenager, a 17-year-old, caught with baggies of cocaine in the car. Under Measure 110, a juvenile judge would not have the ability to detain that child caught with meth, heroin, etc. It's funded with millions of dollars from out-of-state interests, which always causes me great concern. A little over $3 million from 2 big out-of-state interests have funded this. It's not funded by Oregonians. It doesn't add new money to the equation either. It takes money away from where we're currently spending our marijuana revenue, and it adds it to this like squeezing a balloon. I see my time is up. So I'm going to respect the moderator and say thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions when DA Hummel is done speaking.
Thank you so much. All right, District Attorney Hummel, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for hosting. And I want to thank the YWCA for having us here today, and my good friend, Kevin Barton, for joining me. Our current system is failing. Oregon ranks nearly last of all states in access to basic drug treatment. But instead of providing better access to treatment, what do? Well, we know what we do. We keep arresting people again and again and giving them criminal records. And while they are in jail, in Oregon, most people in jail do not receive drug treatment. Our current approach is ruining lives. It makes it harder for people to get a job, get housing, or even to get approved for a credit card. Our current approach is expensive. It costs over $30,000 to arrest, prosecute, and jail someone for simple drug possession. It costs much less to provide drug treatment and recovery services. And our current approach is unfair. And we know people of color use drugs at about the same rate as white people, but they are much more likely to get arrested. Measure 110 will reduce racial disparities in drug arrests by 95%. This is according to an independent research from the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. It does this by removing unfairly harsh punishments for minor nonviolent drug offenses. Measure 11 will establish, Measure 110, sorry, will establish a more humane, equitable, and effective approach to drug addiction. Here's what's going to happen. Instead of arresting and jailing people for drugs, Oregon would use marijuana tax revenue to pay for more addiction treatment services. It'll save lives and save money. Measure 110 does not legalize drugs. This is important to know. No change is made to the criminal code for selling drugs or manufacturing drugs. Still a crime. Cannot sell drugs, cannot manufacture drugs. No change is made for other crimes associated with drug use, such as theft or driving while impaired. Still crimes. No change is made to workplace drug testing. Employers can still drug test at the workplace. No change is made to drug courts or to treatment provided through the criminal justice system. Measure 110 simply changes small-scale drug possession to an infraction offense, and it provides more treatment throughout the state. Now, because Measure 110 will shift us from punishing drug addiction to using a health-based treatment-first approach, it's received more than 100 endorsements from organizations across the state. Some heavy hitters. 110 is endorsed by the American College of Physicians, the Oregon Nurses Association, the Oregon School Psychologists Association, the Crime Victims' Rights Alliance, the Academy of Family Physicians, and the YWCA, who is hosting us tonight. Now, why now? Well, quite simple, because we can't afford to wait. Nearly 2 Oregonians die every day from drug overdoses, and someone in Oregon gets arrested every hour for simple drug possession. We urgently need a better approach to drug policy. Measure 110 is this better approach. Please join me in voting yes on 110. Thank you.
Thank you, DA Hummel. All right, so this now begins our Q&A segment. We'll have roughly 10 minutes to answer audience questions, and I will take the moderator prerogative and direct the first question to DA Barton. You had described the measure a little bit like you'd use the buffet example. If you were to have an a la carte option, what items would you pull out of the existing measure?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I would take the decriminalization aspect out of the existing measure. I would keep within it the establishment of the additional drug treatment opportunities. The reason why I think decriminalization is so concerning is not out of any desire to prosecute drug users. That's no desire whatsoever. In fact, I fully support expungements, which are the cleaning up or the erasure of criminal records once probation is successfully completed. But I firmly believe, and this is from years of experience in witnessing treatment courts, specialty courts, and drug courts, that requiring someone and supervising a drug addict to ensure that they're engaging in the treatment is a necessary component to success. And I believe if 110 passes and we make drug treatment for users voluntary, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road because they won't seek that treatment. Eventually, they will commit more crimes and property crimes to fuel that drug habit, and then they'll be eligible for going to prison. And I think that will ultimately cause more harm than good, which is why I believe that the decriminalization is the dangerous aspect of Measure 110. So to follow up on this, we have a question about
the success rates between voluntary and mandatory treatment programs. I think this can go to either panelist about what is your experience of the relative success rates between those two approaches, which are clearly part of this measure.
Well, I'm happy to jump in on this. I want to respectfully disagree with Kevin on this. He makes the kind of the stick argument. We need to threaten somebody with a jail or a criminal conviction to get them to kind of act the way we want them to act. The idea that people won't help themselves, that's insulting to those living with an addiction. People are not in treatment now because affordable, accessible, and quality treatment is not available to them. Also, people don't seek treatment because they fear being arrested. We've stigmatized addiction. We've told people if you are living with an addiction, you are a criminal. Who's going to want to come forward and seek help if they're afraid of having a conviction? And we also know this, people who go to jail for drug offenses overdose at a higher rate than those who don't. So by trying to obtain what is a worthy goal to try to help people who we think won't help themselves, we're putting them more at risk. We're putting them at risk of drug overdoses because people who go to jail drug overdose at a higher rate. And so I trust people who are living with an addiction to do what is right for them, but they can only do what is right for them if we have affordable and accessible and quality treatment available near them.
Please respond.
Well, given that I think the title of today's event is what, bring your ballot and a beverage. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
I'll bet my friend John a beer that if he were to call his jail right now and ask how many people are sitting in the Deschutes County Jail for simple drug possession, the answer would be fewer than 5. In fact, I'd wager it's close to 0, as it is in Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington. The reality is we don't send people to jail and to prison in Oregon for simple drug possession. We, by and large, use a treatment-first mentality, but we do that with court-ordered supervision. And that's why groups like Oregon Recovers, which is Oregon's largest coalition of people in recovery, and groups like Oregon Council for Behavioral Health, which is a nonprofit for providers of treatment programs, have both come out against ballot measure 110, saying it's full of false promises, lives will be lost, and it's devoid of any accountability to the BIPOC, queer, rural, and formerly incarcerated communities. So it's not a DA approach. This is a treatment community, and others who are involved in the addiction area recognize the danger of allowing addicts to simply voluntarily participate in treatment.
So a follow-up on one of those statements about who is actually currently in jail for drug possession crimes at this point. We had a question about whether it may be, are you seeing that drug offenses may be used to actually add time to someone's sentence? Sorry, that's the halfway point.
Oh. Well, I think it's something important to point out. DA Barton correctly said that people are not in prison for possession alone, but most people, or many people, are not aware of the distinction between prison and jail. Prison are the big facilities in Salem and throughout the state where people go for long sentences. But the vast majority of people who are incarcerated in Oregon are serving time in their local jail. And there most definitely are people who serve time in jail for possession. And so that is the issue here. People are serving time for possession. And also, even if they don't serve a long sentence, and most people aren't serving extensively long sentences for possession. But if you have a job and you're arrested by the police and you are brought to jail, the fact that you might get out 2 days later, you're going to get out without a job because you didn't show up for work. And so short jail sentences fundamentally impact people's lives. That's why we see that people who serve jail sentences, regardless of the length, overdose at a higher rate than people who don't.
So we had another question about whether either of you could speak to either personal experience with drug addiction, know what it's like in your sort of to speak from rather than the professional perspective, but the personal perspective.
This is Kevin. I have no personal experience with drug addiction. I attend every single graduation from our drug treatment court, our veterans treatment court. and talk to the graduates and the survivors of that process, but I have no personal experience with it.
I knock on wood every day that I am not someone who's living with an addiction. I feel fortunate because of that. My sister lives with an addiction. I've seen that growing up. I've seen how she struggled with that. She's been involved in the criminal justice system. I can tell you the criminal justice system hasn't helped her. It's been loving family and quality treatment that she's been able to access because she was fortunate enough to, grow up in the privileged world that I grew up in. And my family has been able to help her. And not everyone has the privilege that I have and my sister has. So eliminating the racial disparities in drug prosecutions is something that is near and dear to my heart, because we know that, people of color are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, and they're disproportionately represented in their wages as well. And so, like Kevin, I can't speak from it directly, but I feel like I live it every day in my family.
Thank you both for sharing that. If Measure 110 were to pass, what happens to all those folks who either are currently serving with a possession charge or have that on their records? Is there thinking about what the next steps would be for those folks?
Let me try and tackle that. So again, there's jail and there's prison. So prison is the state penitentiary. It's where you go for a felony conviction, and jail is the local county jail. Nobody serves time in prison in Oregon for a simple drug possession. The jails are used for short jail sentences. I called this morning each of the 3 tri-county jails to find out who's in jail right now. Nobody is in jail in Washington County for drug possession alone. Nobody's in jail in Multnomah County for drug possession alone. 3 people are in jail in Clackamas County for drug possession alone. They also had additional charges, but are now serving a sentence just on those drug possession charges. But that's not to say that people don't serve jail sentences for drug possession. They absolutely do. It's kind of like if you want to compel behavior, a judge might say to someone, do treatment or else, and they'll use short jail sanctions to compel behavior. So if a UA comes back positive, a judge will say, you're going to spend the night in jail. And that's done to encourage and compel treatment behavior so that we can hopefully avoid having them commit more serious crimes, which might eventually send them to prison. That's why I say this measure is necessary to stop more serious crimes from occurring. And this measure ultimately, the measure will ultimately be harmful because it won't stop more serious crimes from occurring as we move forward.
Hummel, do you have any comment on the question or the argument?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, I'll come back to I guess the question was, what are we going to do with people who have previous convictions? Well, know this. Again, this measure does not address if you're dealing drugs or manufacturing drugs. So if you have if you're a dealer or a manufacturer, you've been convicted before this measure, you would be convicted after this measure. It's important to know this measure talks about these small possession of drugs. I've got a sugar packet here. This is 1 gram right here, small amount. If you possess more than 1 gram of heroin after measure 110 is passed, still a crime. So we're talking small amounts of personal use drugs are going to not result in you having a criminal conviction that's going to cost you your job and your housing. And so that's very important. How we handle people who have previously been convicted, measure 110 does not address that.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you. We're at our time for Q&A. If you have a short closing statement, would welcome that before we turn over to the next measure.
You asked two trial attorneys to give a short statement. I'll kick it off first. Again, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank the YWCA. And I think Kevin, who's a friend of mine, and I love that we can agree respectfully. I disagree respectfully. We certainly can agree respectfully. That's easy. Measure 110 is going to make a more fair and just system for dealing with people who are living with an addiction. It's not going to saddle them with a criminal conviction. It's not going to cost them their job. It's going to provide accessible, quality, and affordable treatment. This is going to result in lower recidivism rates, lives saved, and a reduction of disparities in our criminal justice system. I'm voting yes, and I hope you join me in voting yes. Thank you.
I want to echo Mr. Hummel and say thank you for devoting the time to this. And this is not the first time that John and I have appeared together and debated issues, and I've always enjoyed that opportunity to do it respectfully with him. So to me, John and I epitomize what I started by saying my comments, which is there's well-intentioned people on both sides. I think everyone in this room agrees we want to do the best we can to address the scourge of drug addiction and make it so that people can rehabilitate themselves and move on toward a successful life. There's no dispute about that issue. The real question is how best to accomplish that, and does Measure 110 make for a better system than what we currently have? We don't have a good system now. It absolutely needs to be reformed and updated to address things like racial disparities, social, economic disparities, and otherwise. But Measure 110 doesn't do that. In my opinion, it kicks the can down the road. It turns drug treatment, even for those people that use small user amounts, it makes it voluntary. Eventually, those small user amounts will become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the addiction will become greater and greater and greater. And then they'll do things like committing property crimes to fuel a drug habit out of control. And then those people who we're not addressing in the criminal system will need to be addressed. But by the time we get to that point, they'll be committing more serious crimes where they'll be eligible for a prison sentence, which I think is a terrible thing to do to someone struggling with a drug addiction that could have been addressed earlier, which is why I'm voting no on Measure 110, but supporting other efforts to reform our justice system.
Gentlemen, thank you both so much. Really appreciate your perspectives and expertise. And we're going to make our transition now to our next measure, which is the Preschool for All measure. And I'm going to introduce our next round of speakers, but virtual kind of round of applause for our district attorneys. So moving to Preschool for All, just like before, we have Trish Gardner, who will provide a summary of the measure, and she will also be providing our argument in opposition. And speaking in favor of the measure will be Multnomah County Commissioner Jessica Vega Pederson. Since 2017, Jessica Vega Pederson has served on the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners representing District 3 and was reelected in May of 2020. During her time with Multnomah County, Commissioner Vega Pederson has chaired the Preschool for All Task Force, sat on several regional transportation tables, and championed legislation on climate and air quality. Before being elected to the board, she served as a state representative in the Oregon legislature, where she was the first Latina elected to the House. So a big welcome to Commissioner Vega Pederson to our virtual happy hour. And before you get going, I'm going to turn things over to Trish to provide the overview of the measure. Sorry, Trish, you got to hit that mute button.
Boy, and I only do this room 5 times a day. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Okay, this is ballot 26-214. It establishes a tuition-free preschool for all program with higher earners income tax funding the program. Essentially, the program provides up to 6 hours per day of tuition-free, developmentally appropriate early learning. It's a mixed delivery model, half day, full day, year-round school year schedules as appropriate, serving 3 or 4-year-olds with parent or legal guardian residing in the county. All those kids would be eligible. Equitable access will be provided to people of color, historically marginalized communities. Before and after care are provided for individuals with qualifying incomes. There'll be a board that will establish provider credentialing requirements, a compensation matrix, including teacher pay being on par with kindergarten teachers, and assistance being paid approximately $19.91 per hour in 2022 with adjustments. It'll be administered by the Department of County Human Services. Again, there'll be a board that will be established, which will then appoint a advisory committee for oversight, policy recommendations, and there'll be independent performance audits. While the tax, which I'll discuss in a moment, would begin January 1st, 2021, free preschool access would be phased in for all by 2030. In the earlier years, slots for students will be prioritized for families who have the least access to quality, affordable preschool opportunities at that time. Financial impact. A 1.5% tax would be imposed on taxable income for single filers earning over $125,000 a year, and for joint filers over $200,000 a year. That could increase by January 2026. In addition to the 1.5% to those income earners that I just discussed, there could be an additional 1.5% tax imposed on taxable income for single filers earning not $125,000, but $250,000 and more. And with respect to joint filers, not as before with just the 1.5, which was $200,000 or over, the additional 1.5 or 3% would be applicable to those joint filers earning over $400,000 a year. There's a new tax on county residents. It would affect, or it's estimated to affect, roughly 8% of filers. The results of a no vote, of course, are there'd be no pre-K program, and the existing preschool systems, such as they are, would remain in operation, and no additional tax would be imposed. So we are ready for the supporter in chief.
Thank you so much, Trish. I just want to thank you guys for hosting this tonight. And I was thinking, it's not BY, it's BYOBB, right? For this evening, for a chance to really to delve in, I think, in some detail about these different measures that everybody's considering as we're eagerly awaiting our ballots in just a week or so, and really appreciate the chance to talk about the work that we're doing around Preschool for All, and why this is such an important thing for folks to vote yes on for the ballot this time around. So, what we have right now is in Multnomah County, we have an opportunity to create this program that will provide all children access to a joyful, quality, culturally uplifting preschool. And that is something that's really exciting to me. It's something that means a lot to me. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this is really making systemic change. It's an investment that we're making that's really going to change the game for so many kids. And when I think about what this opportunity can do, I think about a story that my mom told me, actually. When she was in 4th grade, she took this district-wide test, like one of those tests of standardized tests, and she scored the highest score out of every 4th grader in her entire school district. And I was so proud. I was so proud that my mom, this young Mexican-American girl, was the absolute best in her class. But she wasn't really excited when she told me about it. And it was really because she didn't even learn about this until she was in 11th grade. She was talking to a high school counselor who told her she never knew her own potential that she had. And the school never invested in the potential that she had as a child. And that broke my heart. And it really made me realize that our systems are not set up to give kids like my mom, girls, brown and black children, the tools that they need to succeed, the things that they need to thrive. So really the heart of the work that I do is really about making sure all kids like my mom get the best start in life. And that's why I'm so glad to lead the work on Preschool for All, which is really this game-changing initiative in Multnomah County for these children, for their families, for the workers in our preschool system, for our whole economy. And this is an investment that our community needs for a lot of reasons. You know, we have the 4th highest childcare and preschool here in Oregon in the entire United States. So just the burden, the cost for so many families of getting their kids into a preschool program, let alone a quality preschool program, is really out of reach. And we know that has impact on the workforce. We know it has impact on people who are able then to participate in the workforce. We also know that there's an impact right now for our preschool system in how much teachers are making, right? Classroom teachers for preschools are making half of what a kindergarten teacher takes, even though, you know, or makes, even though they're doing, you know, similar jobs and really having similar influence on these young children's lives. And I think that this is especially true because of the impacts that we're seeing right now because of COVID. Here in Oregon, there was a survey done, a national survey, but of those childcare providers who responded from Oregon, 50% of them said that because of COVID, they wouldn't be able to stay open for business unless there was some kind of public investment in the work that they did in childcare. And we know that right now here in Multnomah County, only 15% of publicly funded preschool slots have any kind of either state or federal funding. So we have too many children who don't have access at all to any kind of public funding, and families to have the help to really to help them bridge that gap. And we need to invest in the system in a way that's going to provide that public support that the providers honestly need. So there was a big challenge, but we needed a solution to this problem. And I'm happy to say about Preschool for All is like that this is a solution that's been a long time in the making. Our community has spoken up and said, like, we know that preschool is important. We've had, and when we came together and worked on Preschool for All, we really brought community together. I convened a task force of 30 people who were, you know, business folks and school districts and early learning experts, all those folks that you'd expect to be there, but also had parent voice at the table, also had culturally specific organizations at the table, also had provider at the table, because we wanted to make sure we were building a plan that was right for Multnomah County and that included the voices of those that were most impacted. And it was built from the beginning, centering racial impacts on children. And that you can see that in the policies that are part of Preschool for All. No suspensions and expulsions for students out of the program. We're making sure that teachers would be getting a living wage in this program. And we're making sure that we would have the career development and professional supports, as well as the infrastructure supports that our providers need so that they can grow those programs, so that we can create that quality experience that 3- and 4-year-olds need in order to be ready for kindergarten and to be ready to thrive.
Thank you,
So, thanks. Is that my time?
That's your time.
Oh my
we will
gosh,
have,
there's so much to say. Okay.
we will have
Thank
time for Q&A.
Good.
Well, maybe.
And I want to, Trish, before you go, I want to encourage folks to really start putting their questions in the chat while we're getting our arguments in favor and opposition, so I can make sure to get them to you all during our Q&A section.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I may be somewhat more brief, as essentially I'm representing the League of Women Voters of Portland, Oregon, and am trying to advance my argument here in opposition in as objective a manner as I can. So I'm not quite the advocate, but hopefully that's okay. All right, but opponents do say that this is not the first or the only tax increase the metro area is seeing during an already fragile economic time. There are payroll and other taxes that are being proposed, and this is just one tax too many. We should find ways to enable families to take care of their own kids rather than expanding government programs and having higher taxes. Given economic uncertainty, the tax may not bring in the expected funding and is planned to increase. Federal implementation of universal preschool might make this ballot measure unnecessary. So I certainly, was within my time frame, but those are the arguments that people have been making in opposition to this ballot measure.
Thank you, Trish. I appreciate that. And I appreciate being able to grab back a couple of minutes. So let's move to our Q&A section. And one of the first questions that we received was, where will the preschools happen? Is it at local schools, new structures? Commissioner, could you address that?
Yes, I'd be happy to, thanks. So that's a great question. One of the early decisions that we made when we were looking about how to bring this together was really, we wanted to make it work for all families. And we also wanted to make sure that we were including all the childcare providers that were out there. We didn't want to put a system in place that was going to have any kind of negative impact. We wanted to grow what we had. So Preschool for All is a program that is really has mixed delivery, which means we can have classrooms in public schools that could be a part of Preschool for All. We could have large preschool providers be a part of it. We could have childcare centers be a part of it. We would even have licensed home-based care be a part of that because we know that they provide a really crucial role in our childcare ecosystem. And we also are talking about some of the multi-generational programs that you see, like Juntos Aprendemos, that really allow the parent and child early learning experience too. So we're not saying, we're not saying it has to be the certain curriculum or it has to be in the certain way. We really are just saying there are developmental standards and goals that are part of Preschool for All that are aligned with what the state standards and recommendations are, that are aligned with the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And if you are able to reach those, you can be a part of Preschool for All.
Got the mute button. We've had a couple of questions coming in a little bit around the question of jurisdiction. So this is really focused on Multnomah County. Should this measure pass, do you expect that other counties or the state would take it up? Also seeing some questions around potential for a national preschool program, and if there's been any thought about how this would integrate into basically efforts at adjacent or larger governments. Yeah, so I know that one of the topics that Trish brought up were really about how, like what would this look like if there was a national program? I mean, frankly, it would be so thrilling if there was a national universal childcare and preschool effort. And it's been really exciting that not only did we have like 2 really strong local efforts to get to universal preschool happening here that were able to unify under Preschool for All, but we had so many of the Democratic presidential candidates talking about the need for universal childcare and preschool. So we had a lot of conversations with the state as we were developing the Preschool for All plan, because there has been, great investment in Oregon in Preschool Promise and Oregon Pre-K, as well as the existing Head Starts from the federal funding that have happened. And what we recognize is like, we are setting up a model for something different though. This is not about, this is not an income restricted program, which, really Head Start and Preschool Promise have income restrictions. This is about providing universal care, universal education to 3- and 4-year-olds, because we know that universal aspect is going to give all children in the community, regardless of income, the opportunity to have quality childcare. And it's a way of making sure that we're including everyone while we're prioritizing the children who have the least access to preschool right now, which are, really low-income children, brown and Black and all kids of color, children with developmental delays and disabilities, children experiencing houselessness. So we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing those kids that have the least access as we're building out this larger program. And if this can be, we would love for this to be a model that could be used throughout the rest of the state and the rest of the country. Digging into that a little deeper, could you speak to the percentage of BIPOC 3- and 4-year-olds in Multnomah County that are currently accessing or not accessing preschool, and how that compares to white 3- and 4-year-olds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't have the exact percentage available. I will say that a lot of the work and the way that we centered the work in creating Preschool for All had to do with a visioning process that was done, and work that had been done even prior to Preschool for All, and really working with communities, communities of color on what their obstacles and what their challenges were in accessing preschool. Because while I don't have the percentage, it is a fact that kids of color have less access than white kids in Multnomah County. And so we really built the model on knowing
and having those challenges that families of color had already identified, and then building from there. There's also was great work that was done by Early Learning Multnomah, which is part of the state's early learning hub system. It's run by United Way in Multnomah County, and looking at how they've set it up, where they really centered race and how they took those state investments for early education and put those dollars to work in Multnomah County. Unfortunately, for a very small percent of those 3- and 4-year-olds, but really centered race in that work, and had a great parent accountability council that actually was part of the leadership of that. And we were able to actually use that parent accountability council. So those parents, those brown and black and all parents of color at that table, were also informing the work of Preschool for All. So I can follow up with that information, but it is something that was really centered in the work that we did.
Trish, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I just wanted to say that the information, again, that I received from the League, which actually may seem as if it's in the supporting category, but it's here, that according to a recent request from Echo Northwest, an estimated 4,400 children here in the county who qualify for state or federal public preschool programs are not currently served by the programs. It's also that Oregon has one of the highest costs for preschool nationwide.
Yep, that's true. The 4th highest in the nation.
So we've had a couple of questions that get to metrics and accountability, both for the existing system and under Preschool for All. So what is currently being done to ensure that childcare providers are actually accountable in delivering childcare, and how would that change if this measure should pass?
So right now in the state of Oregon, there isn't a separate license to be a preschool provider. It's real. The license is around being a childcare provider, right? So there isn't a separate thing for preschool providers. But what there are for early education is really part of the early learning division at the state level, where they've put in some standards and some guidance around what that looks like. So what are the developmental standards? What are some of the statewide the standards? And those we've taken, you know, and brought them into the Preschool for All standards that we're using, so they're aligned. But we've also layered on top of that additional equity and culturally specific standards, because we know that they didn't go far enough, and they really didn't, you know, meet the needs that we had here. And we really looked to NACI, the national standards, to making sure that those were incorporated in how we were setting up Preschool for All.
So one more question here, building off of actually a statement that Trish made in her opening argument. There are many asks on this November's ballots for tax increases. Why should voters pass Preschool for All now, this November?
Yeah, you know, we really were cognizant of just what our economic situation was in general, even before COVID happened, right? Even before we knew everything that was going to be on the ballot, and really how there's, you know, how there are people who are doing quite well and people who are struggling. And that was true before COVID, and I think that's even more true now. So we set up a progressive tax mechanism that meant the people who could afford to pay this would be paying this, right? If you're earning your income, you know, above that $200,000 threshold for households, you know, you're probably doing pretty well, and you would be. But for, you know, over 90% of Multnomah County residents, you wouldn't be impacted by this. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing, and they were just, you know, reports that have come out both at the national and the state level in terms of like economic impacts. We're seeing the most disparate impacts of this recession than any recession since the Depression, right? People who were struggling before are struggling even more now, and people who were doing well before are not being impacted as much by what's been happening since COVID. And so, you know, we actually think that this is a really, this is the right tax mechanism for the right time. And I would also say, though, that the benefits of early education are felt community-wide. they, it's not just about the kids who are going to have, higher IQs and better reading and more success in kindergarten, elementary school, and graduating at higher rates. It's not just about the families who are going to have this cost burden taken away from them and be able to participate more in the workplace, right? It's about the community-wide impacts. It's about having a more stable workforce with less turnover, better retention. It's about having lower costs in the long run because of this upstream investment for public safety costs. It's having a larger tax base overall because there are higher incomes that are associated with quality preschool, right? So all of those benefits are going to be felt by all of us as a community. I don't think you can talk about the costs of preschool without also talking about the benefits.
Thank you very much. We are actually at time, but if either of you would like to make a short closing statement, offer that opportunity.
I'll decline, thank you. I think, I've already said what should be said.
All right, Commissioner.
And I think, yeah, and I would just say really briefly, I think this is an amazing opportunity in these times where people are asking, what can we do to make a difference? What can we do to bring systemic change, to face issues of poverty and race that we're all feeling? This is one of those really bold investments that we have an opportunity to do in Multnomah County to create the best universal preschool system in the entire nation.
Thank you very much. Let's give a virtual thank you to our pro and con argument on Preschool for All measure. And we are going to move on, last but certainly not least, to the City of Portland charter amendment that would authorize a new independent community police oversight board. So Trish Gardner will again provide our summary and again provide our argument in opposition. And we are also joined by Cameron Whitten, speaking in favor of the measure. Cameron is a community activist, small business owner, nonprofit executive, and general Renaissance individual. At the age of 18, Cameron worked themselves out of youth homelessness in Portland and has spent the past decade giving back to the very same community that was there when they needed it most. They have a bachelor's in economics from PSU and an MBA and are an MBA student at Willamette University. Cameron recently served as the executive director of the Q Center and are the founder and CEO of racial justice program Brown Hope. They serve on the board of REACH CDC and Pioneer Courthouse Square. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to do another reminder for folks in the Zoom and Facebook live chat to continue to put your questions in there while we go through the measure summary and our arguments in favor and opposition. There was an electronic coin toss, so Trish is going to give the overview and then give the argument in opposition, and then Cameron, you will go second. All right.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Hopefully you aren't getting tired of me here. All right. This is ballot measure 26-217. As Elizabeth said, the essential question is whether the city charter should be amended to authorize a new independent community police oversight board to investigate complaints against Portland police and impose discipline. A yes vote would include this new community oversight board with new powers and new responsibilities to investigate complaints against police employees, including deaths in custody, uses of deadly force, complaints of force that result in injury, discrimination against protected classes, violations of constitutional rights, and other items. Essentially, the proposal sets out 18 months of essentially a development period in which the community would be engaged to work out the system's details and to submit a proposal to the city council for adoption. When that is complete, members of the oversight board will be appointed by the city council, which would include representation from diverse communities. The board, under this new proposal, would have the power to subpoena witnesses and request police documents and evidence to investigate complaints against the Portland Police Bureau. The board could also impose disciplinary actions up to a termination of law enforcement professionals. The board is also authorized to recommend policing policy to the Portland Police Bureau and to the Portland City Council. In terms of its financial impact, it requires board funding to be no less than 5% of the Police Bureau's annual operational budget. Based on this year's budget, that would be approximately $11.5 million. Nothing in the measure, however, requires any particular source or direction of funding. The probable results of a no vote, the current police oversight system that exists in the city, which is a shared responsibility between the auditor and the mayor, would remain as is. Opponents say the barriers to and the problems with more police accountability are really in state law and the city code and the current union contract with the Police Bureau, not with the current oversight system. Officers in the proposed system will be held to the same work rules that exist today until they're changed. And the same legal protections for officers that apply today will continue to apply, even if this proposal is adopted. The measure is unvetted, and it will take years before the commission contemplated by the council figures out the details and works out the policy, the legal and contractual issues. That is the summary of the arguments in opposition.
Thank you, Trish, for giving the overarching summary and then rolling right into the arguments in opposition. The floor now goes to Cameron Whitten to provide arguments in favor of the charter amendment. And you have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a warning at the 1 minute mark, and then we'll roll into our 10-minute Q&A section.
Thank you, Elizabeth. My name is Cameron Whitten. I've lived in Portland my entire adult life. I worked myself out of youth homelessness at the age of 18, and I've spent the last 5 years as a nonprofit executive serving our most vulnerable Portlanders. I'm here urging us to vote yes on Measure 26217 to support real police accountability through an independent community oversight body that can save lives and make our communities safer. Portland, just like every major city in the United States, has been rocked by social unrest in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. This wasn't the first time we heard "I can't breathe." This wasn't the first time we watched helplessly as a Black man's life was unjustly taken by a police officer who was entrusted to serve and protect the people. Communities across the country are grappling with the growing epidemic of brutal police violence, which especially impacts Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and people with mental illness. And Portland is no exception. In the past decade, 20 people with mental illness have been killed by the Portland Police Bureau. None of the officers responsible for those 20 deaths have faced criminal charges for their actions. Only one officer faced discipline. Officer Ron Frashauer was fired after shooting Aaron Campbell, a 25-year-old Black man with no criminal history, and the police were called because he was going through a mental health crisis and considering suicide. In 2010, Frashauer was fired because of his actions and then was rehired by the very same bureau 5 years later. The U.S. Department of Justice opened a lawsuit against the city of Portland in response to the discriminatory and excessive use of force against Portlanders experiencing mental health crises. Portland has been operating under the terms of that settled agreement, and yet in 2019, just last year, was the deadliest year in the past decade against Portlanders experiencing mental health crises. None of the officers have been accountable for these killings. Portland created its first police accountability system in 1982. After years of limited success, it was replaced with our current model, the Independent Police Review, which was formed in 2000. Not a single instance of police discipline has been overturned by the IPR until last year. almost 2 decades since that system was established. Portland's current oversight bodies, including the IPR and the Citizen Review Commission, have failed to have meaningful independent oversight of the police for a variety of reasons. And Portlanders have been denied real accountability for decades. We have been faced with 7 police chiefs in the last 10 years and 1-term mayors since 2005. This constant churn of leadership has not worked. We urgently need real oversight and accountability by and for the people. Measure 26217 gives the people of Portland the opportunity to actually have a choice in how policing will work moving forward. This measure adds a charter amendment authorizing an independent police oversight board appointed by City Council and combines best practices from police accountability specialists across the country, ensuring 1, that it has the resources needed to adequately investigate officer misconduct. 2, it has real teeth, including the ability to approve subpoenas, access police records, and also recommend discipline. And 3, is truly independent and representative of the will of the people. So I urge you to join the 50+ strong and diverse coalition of community leaders and organizations who have endorsed Measure 26217. This is an historic opportunity for real police accountability that can save lives and make our communities safer. Thank you.
Elizabeth, I think it might be somewhat helpful if I give an extremely brief description of what the current system seems to be. So if you, okay, all right. There, I think Cameron mentioned there's the Independent Police Review. There's also the Portland Police Bureau's Internal Affairs. If an investigation that may result in suspension or more that involves the use of force and alleged misconduct, it would go through the Police Review Board, which is an internal police advisory board and body, that makes recommendations to the police chief, and its meetings are not open to the public. The IPR is a division of the City Auditor's Office. It has a budget of $2.8 million, a staff of 16 employees, including a director and 8 investigators. If the IPR determines a complaint requires investigation, it can conduct the investigation or refer it to the Police Bureau's Internal Affairs. However, IPR has authorization to subpoena non-officer witnesses and documents that cannot directly access Police Bureau files, nor subpoena officers or compel them to testify. At the present, the city code does require police officers to participate in IPR interviews. They also receive a written directive from the police office in the beginning of the interview that participation in an investigation is a job requirement. The IPR is not authorized to investigate officer-involved shootings or in-custody deaths. It has the power to investigate misconduct of police and issue reports, but does not have the power to impose disciplinary action. The police chief and ultimately the city council is responsible for disciplinary decisions. IPR does have the power to make policy recommendations to the police chief and is required to publish them for a public review, but these are policy recommendations. The CRC, or the Citizen Review Committee, is a voluntary board that meets publicly. It's appointed by the city council and advisory to IPR and internal affairs. They handle cases when people whose misconduct have been investigated, usually the police disagree with Police Bureau. Actually, that's not the case. They handle cases, misconduct cases that have been investigated, but there's a disagreement with the Police Bureau command findings. Their appeal hearings and the standard or what they can actually do is determine if those decisions are reasonable. They have the authority as well to make policy recommendations to the Police Bureau and City Council. The CRC is not authorized to hold appeal hearings on officer-involved shootings or in-custody deaths. In the cases it can review, the CRC cannot overturn disciplinary decisions which are made by the police chief. If the police chief disagrees with the CRC's recommendation in a misconduct case, the City Council holds a hearing and makes the final call. There's also a contract, an important one, between the city and the Portland Police Association, which governs the interactions and limits the authority of oversight boards and the City Council with respect to Bureau members. The current agreement expires in 2021. In addition, state law authorizes a private arbitrator to review and overturn disciplinary decisions in certain narrow contexts when an officer files a grievance. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful in trying to parse what the proposal does in terms of adding powers that are not currently held by the IPR and CRC.
Thank you for those clarifying comments. Have some questions that have been coming in while you two have been capably providing the arguments for and against, along with a lot of context. I think first of all, it would be great, Cameron, will you confirm for this group that this is the same as the proposal that Commissioner Hardesty put forward?
Yes. That is supported by Mayor and City Council, yes.
Thank you very much. This question of accountability keeps coming up when we talk about policing, not just in Portland, but across the country. And I think there's been a lot of concern about the union contract as being one of the biggest barriers to accountability. So what is the relationship with the Oversight Board to the union contract, and how will this change help to address that?
That is an excellent question. And one of the biggest challenges that we have had for real oversight is that it is underfunded. Every police officer has a union representative that is going through all of the code, going through all the training materials, and advocating on behalf of that officer, even if the public knows that the officer has breached our trust and has really breached the expectations of the job. Every oversight body that we have currently is completely understaffed and is unable to thoroughly investigate every single act of police misconduct, and to also ensure that that conduct is really aligned with the spirit and values of public safety, not just what's in the union contract. And so this is a body that has the resources to truly investigate and allow for those investigations to inform recommendations to be changing our charter moving forward, and also police requirements within their contract. And so ultimately, the City of Portland and City Council, they have to adopt the contract. But when it comes to the community actually having a say, this is our best opportunity to have community members who will have less of a barrier to participate. And then also, and because there is, within the language of the contract, there is a desire to ensure that most impacted communities, vulnerable communities, are able to participate and receive support in order to do that, and that this agency will actually be staffed enough to ensure that every single incident of death, of excessive force that happens by a City of Portland police officer, that is thoroughly investigated, and that will inform how we negotiate on police contracts to the future. And so this really is an opportunity to give people that power.
Have any other cities or states done something like this? And if so, what was the result?
That's a good question. This is truly a historic measure. And I personally can't tell you of another oversight body that is this level of independent, that has this level of resources, and has this much ability to compel officers to comply with its direction and to ensure that discipline happens. It truly is historic for Portland, and I hope that it serves as a template for the rest of this country.
And I would say that at the moment, there are a number of jurisdictions that are considering some, but not all, of the proposals that are put forth here. There's a fair degree of variety. I can't give you the details of each state and city and such like that, but I know that they are being considered, and some of these proposals are being considered, different ones and different combinations.
Thank you very much. I want to ask, we're at 5:21. I want to ask one, maybe two more questions, just to be mindful of everyone's time. There was an argument brought up by Trish around how quickly the measure came together. And is it really adequately vetted to then become part of the city's charter, which is the equivalent of the Constitution for a city government?
Well, there have been police accountability activists and advocates who've been working for decades on this. For great example, City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. And even when the independent police review was established by the mayor and auditor at the time, there was a community oversight body that created recommendations as a part of a majority report in order to create real accountability. And those recommendations were not listened to. And so you can say, well, this is the first time the city council has truly considered real oversight. But the reality is that the work and the policy has been worked on for a very long time. This is a unique window that everyone in our city is at home. They can't turn off the TV screen. They must look at how the system has failed. This is a unique window for us to finally move forward on a conversation that we have needed to take action on for decades. And so you might say that it was rushed, but we've been fighting for police accountability for a very long time, and we're glad that it's finally happening.
And I would say, again, hopefully I'm not, moving from my opponent's position over much, but one of the provisions of the proposal, as I said, is there's this 18-month development period to really nail down the details. This can get kind of complicated. So that is at least an additional time period within which all the policies, facts, circumstances, guidelines, et cetera, can be considered.
Trish, you drive a hard bargain. I'd like to give both of you a moment to provide any closing remarks on your arguments for this evening.
I used to practice law as an attorney, so I'm used to giving both sides. I'm going to most respectfully decline. I think I've already stated the arguments in opposition, and I'm more than happy to give Cameron my time.
Oh, wow. I don't know if I'll use it all, but it is clear that we need change. And this is something that Americans across all political spectrums understand, that our system of policing is horribly broken and we need reform. We can sit here and wait for the best solution to come. That's never going to happen. This is a unique moment for us to save lives and ensure our communities move are safer. And so I want to just use this moment to thank the leadership of City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, Mayor Ted Wheeler, and the rest of our city council that moved to take action, as many of us have sat at home wondering, what do we do to move Black Lives Matter forward? This is not going to be the final solution, but for Portland and Oregon, which has a unique history of white supremacy, has had a unique history of both state-sanctioned and society-sanctioned violence against Black, Brown, Indigenous people. We truly have an opportunity to do something different and allow for us to truly have justice within our communities. And so we urge you to join this large coalition to support Yes for Police Accountability November 3rd. Thank you.
Let's give a big digital thank you very much to our panelists. They've been excellent. Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you to all of our speakers this evening. We've come to the end of our happy hour. And also thank you to the League of Women Voters for their support of this event. We also want to say thank you again to all the speakers that took the time to prepare and come and debate with us, for sharing their expertise and their viewpoints. And hopefully these discussions have provided a really good framework as we all go into our own voting decisions. And, you know, I couldn't end this happy hour without making sure that we call on the importance of voting and making sure that your voice is counted. Oregon has been using vote by mail for 20 years, and all the efforts to undermine it, we know better. We have the systems in place to support the voting process, even in these uncertain times. So remember, the last day to register is October 13th. Ballots are mailed out on the 14th, and vote early if you can. In Multnomah County, you can drop off your ballots at official Dropbox sites, which include libraries and boxes around neighborhoods. If you're in another county, go to your county elections website. You can find the information there. If you plan to mail your ballot, give yourself at least 7 to 10 days just to avoid any potential issues with post office problems. And one final word, please vote in all categories. It's not just about the presidential election. It's not just about the big fancy, you know, folks at the top of the ballot. Vote all the way down the ballot to the measures and to the amendments. These are the issues that impact our day-to-day lives here. So I just want to say thank you, everybody. Thank you to the YWCA, and I wish everybody a fantastic evening, and go out there and encourage everybody else to vote and make their plan to vote.
And
So,
thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. And
this has been so fun.
Vote, yes.
Okay,
Bye.
I don't have control over how to end this.